Good morning, church. It's good to be with you here today on this very special Tuesday when we get to talk with each other. We are in Luke 23 today, and we are going to talk about the linchpin event in the Christian faith, the crucifixion of Jesus. And, it seems a little overwhelming even to try to boil down what we want to say into a few moments' remarks. But I want to focus on the mockery that they leveled against Jesus while he was on the cross. And if we look at verse 35, it says, "The people stood watching, and even the leaders were scoffing. He saved others. Let him save himself if this is God's Messiah, the chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him. They came offering him sour wine and said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." An inscription was above him: "This is the King of the Jews." Then one of the criminals hanging there began to yell insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." A fundamental misunderstanding of what Jesus was doing. All throughout Scripture, we are reminded, the New Testament, that this is not an event that was forced upon Jesus. He didn't suddenly get caught. He didn't suddenly become careless and therefore got crucified. He wasn't crucified because he was a criminal, even though that's what they thought. He was a lawbreaker, a Sabbath breaker, a rabble rouser, a threat to the kingdom. When they bring him to Pilate, that's the accusation they bring. Oh, they say this guy says he's a king. You don't want a rival king to Caesar roaming around, do you? And that's ultimately what compels Pilate, along with the riot that they are developing, that we don't want this tension building with Rome. And so they put Jesus on the cross, and now they're mocking him. Come down. If you're everything you say you are, come down. And we're tempted to think that if Jesus had complied, that perhaps they would have seen and understood the nature of what he was doing. And perhaps for a moment, they would have lamented and repented of what they had done. But we are reminded in John, especially John 12, 11, and the resurrection of Lazarus, that even the resurrection of the dead was insufficient to bring people to see that Jesus really was who he claimed to be. Their hearts were so hard, just like Pharaoh's, when we were reading about the beginning of the plagues on Egypt today, too. Their hearts were so hard that nothing was going to convince them. But beyond that, it Jesus couldn't save himself. If he wanted to accomplish his mission, he had to walk through this pain, this death. He had to go through it. And perhaps the irony behind their mockery is that he would, as God, ultimately save himself uh, in the resurrection that is to come in just a few days. He conquers death, he rises from the grave, and his not that he needed salvation, but that salvation from death is secured for himself for eternity and for all of us who believe. This is the moment that Paul says in Romans 10:9, if you believe in your heart Jesus is Lord, he really is King, and if you confess with your mouth, that Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. There's salvation here. And so, church, I just want to remind you today that when things look dark, when things look grisly, remember that we turn to our God who went through dark and grisly times. And Hebrews says that our God can sympathize with us in all of our needs and in all of the hard things, because he's been there and he's been through them. And so let's run to him. Let's not mock him because he's on the cross. Let's not mock him because he is a God who chose to be humble and meek and mild and weak, but rather worship him because he did choose that. And he invites us to come and walk the same path. And if we do, and if we rebuke those who mock, just like this thief on the cross who we hear about, who achieved salvation that day, let's understand who Jesus really is and come and worship.